Madrid. The year is 1834. The king is dead. Yet my work, as the royal physician, is not finished. I am summoned through corridors heavy with incense, into a chamber where candles gutter in the draught. The Queen Regent, Maria Christina, waits with swollen eyes. Her voice is low, but her words freeze the blood in my veins. "Doctor, you must preserve him, all of him." I draw closer to the bed, where Ferdinand VII lies, draped in silk. Even in death, he seems to sneer, his pale lips twisted as though mocking Spain one final time. But it is not his face that commands my gaze. Beneath those sheets lies the secret that haunted his reign, the thing courtiers whispered about in locked rooms, the thing historians dared not put in their official accounts. They called him El Rey Deseado, the desired king. But what Spain received was a monarch consumed by shame, by grotesque rumor, and by a body as twisted as the kingdom he ruled. For 2 decades, his private affliction bled into public life. His paranoia, his cruelty, his humiliation of queens, these were not isolated scandals, but the reflection of a reign itself, deformed, oversized, and destructive. As I prepare the embalming instruments, I cannot help but remember the stories, the wedding nights that ended in screams, the queens who withered in despair, the letters smuggled to Rome, begging the Pope for guidance on duties too painful to endure. And always, the whispers, rumors of contraptions crafted in secret workshops, of rituals timed to the stars, of a king who mistook obsession for destiny. Now, as silence fills the chamber, I realize I am not simply preserving flesh. I am preserving a symbol, a kingdom broken by its ruler's own body and mind. This is not a tale of policy or treaties. It is the forbidden story of Ferdinand VII, the monarch whose most private shame became Spain's most public curse. And tonight, you will hear what was whispered in corridors, hidden in sealed letters, and buried beneath royal silk. The truth, half rumor, half record, of the king who may have been the most perverted ruler in all of history. But before we uncover the evidence, ask yourself, was Ferdinand truly a monster of flesh, or a man crushed by the weight of legend? I was not always a man of shadows and secrets. When I first entered royal service, Spain still clung to the tattered image of empire. The Bourbon crown gleamed above palaces of marble, but the streets outside were hungry, and the whispers of rebellion carried across the Atlantic from the colonies. Ferdinand was born in 1784, in the halls of El Escorial, a palace as vast and cold as the dynasty itself. His father, Charles IV, was gentle but weak, a man who loved hunting more than ruling. His mother, Maria Luisa of Parma, was sharp-tongued, scandalous, and forever linked to Manuel Godoy, the all-powerful minister, whose shadow fell across every chamber of court. From such a marriage between cousins, bound by politics more than affection, came Ferdinand, a child destined to inherit not only the crown, but centuries of inbreeding, weakness, and decay. I studied medicine among men who whispered of family taint, of inherited maladies that stalked the Bourbons as surely as the plague stalked villages. The Habsburg jaw, the Bourbon lethargy, signs of bloodlines twisted upon themselves. In Ferdinand, these legacies converged. By adolescence, courtiers murmured that something was wrong, though few dared to speak the truth aloud. When the storm of Napoleon's conquest swept across Europe, Spain's monarchy cracked like old plaster. Charles IV abdicated under pressure, Godoy fled, and the people looked to Ferdinand. They called him El Rey Deseado, the desired king. For a brief, shining moment, Madrid believed deliverance had come. But what they received was a young man ill-prepared for the weight of crown or country. Napoleon lured him to Bayonne, stripped him of authority, and left Spain in the hands of a foreign brother. While the people bled in the Peninsular War, Ferdinand remained in comfortable captivity in France, and it was there, I believe, that the seeds of paranoia began to sprout. When he returned to Spain in 1814, the crowds hailed him with tears and flowers. They believed a savior had returned, but I watched closely. Behind the smiles and bows, Ferdinand's eyes darted, suspicious, as though every cheer concealed mockery. He abolished the liberal constitution of 1812, restored absolute monarchy, and ruled not with vision, but with fear. Spain in those years was a kingdom of hunger and humiliation. The treasury was empty. The colonies of the Americas slipped, one by one, into independence. Soldiers marched without pay. Farmers starved as nobles feasted. And in the palace, Ferdinand turned inward not toward the nation's salvation, but toward his own obsessions. He married 4 times, each union less a partnership than a medical ordeal. The court physicians, my predecessors, were called not to celebrate births, but to soothe traumas, to mix laudanum for terrified queens, to design contraptions that would allow the king to perform his duties. Behind closed doors, whispers of his condition grew louder, until even foreign ambassadors wrote home with scandal in their ink. Yet what I learned over the years was this: Ferdinand's body was not merely a private affliction. It was a mirror of the Spain he ruled. Misshapen, overgrown, unable to function as intended. His paranoia bled into decrees. His cruelty mirrored his humiliation. His dynasty staggered as surely as his own steps, swollen with gout and fear. By the time his reign neared its end, Spain was no longer the empire of Philip II. It was a broken shell, mocked by neighbors, haunted by colonies lost, and ruled by a king whose very name had become synonymous with disgrace. Now, as I look back, I see clearly. Ferdinand was less a sovereign than a symptom, a living embodiment of centuries of corruption, a monarch who carried in his veins and in his body the sickness of an entire dynasty. But the records of his reign do not end with decrees and battles. They are thick with rumors and legends, whispered in palace corridors and preserved in forbidden letters. And if you wish to know Ferdinand, you must listen to those whispers. In these corridors, truth and rumor walk hand in hand. I have served long enough to know that the palace has 2 histories, one inscribed in official decrees, the other whispered in candlelit corners. When it comes to Ferdinand VII, the whispers are louder than the proclamations. The stories begin on his wedding nights. I was not yet present for the first, but my predecessors recorded their notes in margins and private diaries, writing what they dared not submit to the crown. They say that Princess Maria Antonia of Naples entered her bridal chamber with high spirits, only to emerge pale and trembling, her ladies-in-waiting whispering of screams behind the door. Within months, the gossip spread that Ferdinand required strange preparations, that intimacy with him resembled not romance but medical procedure. Other versions of the story claim something darker, that the king demanded witnesses, that servants or physicians were commanded to confirm what transpired in the royal bed. I have seen no decree that orders such indecency, yet the rumors were too consistent to ignore. Even foreign ambassadors carried the tales back to Paris, to London, to Vienna, chuckling behind closed doors at Spain's humiliation. Then came his second queen, Maria Isabel of Portugal. She died in childbirth, delivering a stillborn child. To the people, it was tragedy. To the palace, it was confirmation of the curse. Another young bride destroyed, another whisper that the king's touch was poison. Some said he forced unnatural treatments, desperate for heirs. Others murmured that her body was simply too fragile for what was demanded of her. I cannot prove these things, yet I saw the way courtiers crossed themselves when her coffin left Madrid. The rumors only grew with Maria Josepha Amalia of Saxony, scarcely more than a child when she arrived. She wept each night, refusing her husband for nearly 2 years. The gossip said she turned to prayer, begging heaven to spare her. And then came the most scandalous tale of all, that Ferdinand himself appealed to the Pope, asking whether a wife could be compelled by sacred command to submit. Imagine the shock. The King of Spain, begging Rome for permission not to govern a nation, but to govern his bed. Even in his final marriage to Maria Christina, the whispers did not cease. By then, Ferdinand was swollen with age and sickness, yet he boasted of his virility in ways that horrified his court. Some claimed he paraded his young queen like a trophy, mocking her fear. Others suggested that she endured in silence, waiting for the day when the crown would pass to her daughter. Beyond the walls of the palace, pamphlets and caricatures made him a figure of ridicule. I have seen them crude sketches of a king with grotesque proportions, sold in marketplaces like carnival masks. They called him the Ogre of Spain, and no censor could stop the laughter. For a monarch, ridicule is deadlier than rebellion, for it rots authority from within. What is true? What is slander? As a physician, I know how stories grow like tumors around a kernel of truth. I have handled the petitions to the Vatican. I have read the anxious notes of court doctors. I have heard sobs through the walls that no woman should have uttered on her wedding night. So when the legends say Ferdinand's chamber was a theater of humiliation, I do not dismiss them. Yet I must also confess, rumor can be sharpened into a weapon. Liberals despised him for abolishing the Constitution. Patriots hated him for selling Spain to France. It served their cause to paint him as monstrous, not only in policy, but in body. Perhaps some tales are exaggeration. Perhaps some are invention. But the fact that they were believed so readily tells us how the world saw him, not as a king, but as a grotesque. And therein lies the cruelest irony. The desired king became a carnival phantom. His private life, a public spectacle. His throne, a stage for ridicule. But rumor alone is not enough. To understand how much of this nightmare was true, we must look to the evidence that survives letters, medical notes, and dispatches written in ink that has not yet faded. In my profession, rumor means little. Flesh, bone, and ink are what endure. If we are to weigh Ferdinand VII's legacy, we must look beyond gossip and examine the records that still breathe in archives and chancelleries. The first and most poignant are the letters of Queen Maria Antonia of Naples, his first wife. I have read fragments, smuggled copies preserved by her ladies. In them she writes, "He delights in my suffering. His cruelty is constant. His affection a mask." These are not the words of a bored consort. They are the testimony of a young woman trapped in a cage of velvet. When she died at 21, consumption was declared. But the timing, the laudanum prescriptions, the sudden decline gave birth to whispers of poisoning. Whether by Ferdinand's order or through despair itself, the ink of her letters is as damning as any autopsy. Then there are the records of physicians. My predecessors were ordered to report on the most intimate matters, as though marriage could be reduced to a medical chart. One entry, copied in a trembling hand, describes the need for mechanical assistance in the royal bedchamber. Another, more clinical, notes Ferdinand's demand for examination. His Majesty insists upon certification of consummation, fearing slander of impotence. That such papers exist is proof enough of the grotesque theater that intimacy became under his reign. But no evidence strikes harder than the petitions sent to Rome during his marriage to Maria Josepha Amalia of Saxony. I have seen summaries in the Vatican's own ledgers. Ferdinand, a king, begging Pope Pius VII for sanction to compel his child bride. Imagine the heir of Spain reduced to pleading not for political legitimacy, but for license to break the will of a terrified girl. Even centuries later, the very existence of those appeals chills the blood. They prove that what many thought wild slander had roots in fact. Foreign ambassadors were equally meticulous. The French envoy described Ferdinand as a man consumed by appetites, without dignity in body or spirit. British dispatches called him the worst monarch Europe has endured in this generation. Diplomats are skilled liars when it suits them, but they are also careful observers, for their words inform governments abroad. Their agreement on Ferdinand's indecency suggests that his vices were not mere Spanish inventions, but truths visible to every foreign court. Within Madrid, courtiers whispered, and sometimes wrote. A diary of one chamberlain, confiscated after his death, noted, "The Queen weeps most nights. His Majesty grows irate when she resists, summoning physicians to assure him of his manhood. The palace is filled not with joy, but with laudanum and tears." That such lines were penned in secret reveals how heavy the air of despair had become. And then there are the pamphlets and caricatures, crude, yes, but revealing. In the markets of Cadiz and Barcelona, one could buy sheets portraying Ferdinand as a bloated satyr, mocking both his figure and his desires. Such images were treasonous, yet they spread. Why? Because they resonated with what people already believed. Propaganda thrives only where belief has fertile soil. Medical notes from his later years complete the picture. By the 1822, gout and obesity crippled him. Yet still, records show him demanding remedies for virility, exotic tonics of powdered pearls, horn, and herbs. Physicians described his body failing, organs strained, limbs swollen, yet his obsession with potency undiminished. In these cold accounts, one sees a man who could not separate his flesh from his crown, who believed that to fail in the bed was to fail as king. Of course, defenders argue otherwise. They say the liberals of Cadiz, the revolutionaries, the exiles all had reason to blacken his name. That every caricature, every rumor was weaponized slander. There is truth in this caution. But when one lays the evidence side by side, letters of queens, petitions to the Pope, dispatches of ambassadors, diaries of courtiers, reports of physicians, the pattern is too consistent to dismiss. As a physician, I was trained to search for symptoms. And here, the symptoms are clear. Humiliation, cruelty, obsession, despair. They recur in every record, from Madrid to Rome to London. Rumor may exaggerate, but it does not create such harmony of misery without reason. Thus the archive itself convicts him, not as a monster of legend, nor as a martyr of slander, but as a king whose private shame poisoned his court, whose obsessions left scars not only on his wives, but on his nation. Yet beyond the records lies something stranger still, the sense that Ferdinand carried with him a curse. His wives dead young, his daughters lost, his kingdom in ruin. Coincidence or phenomena that defy explanation? There are things that no physician's quill can neatly explain. I can write of fever, of laudanum, of broken bodies, but I cannot account for the shadows that followed Ferdinand VII. Call them coincidence, call them curses, call them the weight of a diseased dynasty. They left marks as real as any scar upon the skin. It began with his wives. 4 queens, 4 tragedies, each more haunting than the last. Maria Antonia, young and spirited, wasted away in despair. Some said her cough lingered long after death, echoing in the palace halls. Servants swore they heard it at night, followed by a faint weeping. I never witnessed it, but I saw their terror, their refusal to pass her old chambers alone. Maria Isabel, his second bride, died in childbirth. The child stillborn, the mother bled out upon the sheets. In Madrid, people whispered that her spirit roamed the corridors carrying a tiny bundle, searching for the baby she never held alive. I tended to courtiers who claimed to see her reflection in mirrors, pale and sorrowful. They were not liars, they were men shaken to their core. Maria Josepha, the child bride from Saxony, seemed cursed from the start. For 2 years she resisted her husband, hiding in prayer. When she finally yielded, she did so with tears that never ceased. She died at 25, frail and broken. Her confessor wrote of her, living in a state of perpetual dread, as though haunted by unseen presences. Was that mere piety, or a cry of a soul stalked by something darker? Even Maria Christina, the only queen who outlived him, bore the taint of his legacy. She wrote letters to Naples that I have read with my own eyes, speaking of being watched, even in silence. She described the king's suspicion as though it were a phantom in the room, invisible, yet suffocating. It was not only his marriages. The kingdom itself seemed touched by ill fate. While he reigned, rebellion spread across the Americas until Spain's colonies were lost. Famines struck the countryside. In 1826, storms of unnatural violence battered Madrid, uprooting trees and tearing tiles from roofs. Priests thundered from pulpits. God himself was punishing Spain for the sins of its king. Superstition, perhaps, but the timing was cruel enough to give weight to their words. Then came the king's own decline. Gout twisted his limbs. Syphilis rotted his strength. His body bloated with decay. He raved of plots and poisons, demanding endless inspections. In his final days, attendants described his chamber as a theater of horror. Candles flickered, though the air was proof. Still, the king raved to shadows at the foot of his bed, and he clutched at invisible hands, as if dragged toward judgment. One priest whispered to me, after hearing his last confession, that Ferdinand begged forgiveness, not for tyranny or treachery, but for things of the flesh that no man should confess aloud. After his death, the omens multiplied. His corpse blackened with unnatural speed, though we embalmed it according to the strictest rites. The candles around his bier sputtered and died in unison, as though choked by unseen breath. Even hardened guards refused to keep vigil, claiming they saw his eyes flicker open in the dark. I cannot confirm this, I only know that none dared remain alone with him. Beyond the palace, Spain fractured. His death should have brought peace, but instead it ignited the Carlist Wars, brother against brother, faith against progress, blood soaking the land. Many whispered it was the king's curse, that even in death, his corruption poisoned the soil of Spain. And then there is the matter of inheritance. Isabel II, his daughter, reigned in scandal and chaos, just as her father had. The curse did not end with Ferdinand, it passed on, a stain in the bloodline. Some said Maria Antonia's spirit cursed his descendants. Others claimed it was divine punishment for a king who mocked heaven itself with his obsessions. As a physician, I should dismiss such talk. But I cannot ignore the pattern. 4 queens destroyed, a kingdom diminished, storms and famines striking with uncanny timing, a monarch who died raving at unseen shadows. If this is not curse, then it is coincidence so cruel as to be indistinguishable. And so when I close my eyes, I ask myself, was Ferdinand merely a weak, cruel man, undone by flesh and folly? Or was he an instrument of something darker, a vessel through which centuries of corruption exacted their toll on Spain? It has been many years since I closed Ferdinand's eyes for the last time, yet his shadow lingers still. I am old now, my hands unsteady, but when I walk through Madrid, I hear his name carried not as honor, but as curse. In the annals of Spain, Ferdinand is remembered not as El Rey Deseado, the desired king, but as El Rey Felón, the treacherous king. Historians write of his betrayals, how he abolished the Constitution of 1812, how he restored tyranny, how he bled the country dry. But outside the libraries and parliaments, his memory is darker still. He is the king of whispers, of grotesque rumor, of wedding nights turned to nightmares. Modern scholars debate the truth. Some argue his reputation was exaggerated by liberals, revolutionaries, and enemies who found it convenient to paint him a monster. They point to caricatures, to slanderous pamphlets, to rumors sharpened into weapons. Yet others, like myself, have seen the documents, letters of weeping queens, petitions to the Pope, physicians' notes too shameful to publish. And we know, even if rumor added poison, there was already venom in the cup. His legacy infected more than memory. Upon his death, the succession of his infant daughter Isabel II ignited the Carlist Wars, plunging Spain into decades of civil conflict. Brothers turned against brothers, provinces burned, and the throne he left behind was stained in more blood than glory. One could say the dynasty itself was cursed. His obsessions, with heirs only sowed further ruin. Today, tourists stroll the royal palace, marveling at its chandeliers and frescoes. Few realize that beneath those gilded ceilings unfolded scenes of humiliation and despair. Museums display portraits of his queens, Maria Antonia, Maria Isabel, Maria Josepha, faces serene, eyes soft. The canvas does not reveal the tears they shed, the despair that hollowed them. Only whispers remain for those who care to listen. In popular histories, Ferdinand is often overshadowed by greater figures, Napoleon, Wellington, Bolivar, yet his name endures as a symbol. The ineffarment monarch whose private shame mirrored the decay of his empire. Writers place him alongside Caligula or Ivan the Terrible, not for conquests, but for grotesquerie. His reign is remembered less for battles won than for dignity lost. And still, there is fascination. Students, writers, even ordinary wanderers ask about him. They lean closer when the guide lowers her voice and says, "Here is where Ferdinand's queen wept. Here is where the king's paranoia consumed him." The allure is not in decrees, but in secrets, those things too obscene for official history, yet too powerful to be forgotten. For me, the physician who once preserved his body, the irony is bitter. Ferdinand sought immortality through heirs, through power, through ceremony. Instead, he achieved it through shame. His true monument is not marble or bronze, it is the whisper, the uneasy laugh, the chill that lingers when his name is spoken. Which leaves one final question. What lesson should we, the living, draw from this man's life and death? Was he truly the most perverted king in history, or was he merely the mirror of a dynasty already doomed? The candles have long burned low, and I too am near the end of my vigil. My hand trembles as I write. But the memory of Ferdinand VII does not fade. It clings, like smoke that will not clear. I was his physician, sworn to heal. Yet what could I mend in a man whose wounds were not only of the body but of the soul? I preserved his flesh, yes, but I could not preserve his dignity. That had rotted long before his death. Now, nearly 2 centuries later, his name lingers not in triumph, but in infamy. He is remembered as a king who mocked his people, who betrayed their hopes, who left them a kingdom divided. But he is also remembered in whispers as a man twisted by his own body, haunted by humiliation, who turned his shame into cruelty. What then are we to make of him? Was Ferdinand truly the most perverted king in history? Or was he merely the symptom of a dynasty already diseased? A monarch cursed by bloodlines, by circumstance, by the laughter of his own courtiers? When I close my eyes, I see not the ruler in his finery, but the broken man on his deathbed, raving at shadows. I see the queens who suffered beside him, their lives cut short, their cries swallowed by palace walls. And I wonder, did Spain deserve such a fate? Or did it create him through centuries of silence and corruption? History may never answer. It leaves us only with fragments. Letters stained with tears, caricatures drawn in mockery, medical notes hidden behind Vatican locks. From these, we weave a picture, but it is a tapestry of rumor as much as fact. And so I leave the question to you, the living. Do you believe Ferdinand VII was truly the most perverted king in Europe's history? Or was he a man crushed beneath legend, his grotesque reputation magnified by politics and slander? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. And if you have found this story as haunting as I have, I invite you to like this video, subscribe to Hidden History Vault, and walk with us again through history's darkest corridors, where kings, queens, and empires reveal the secrets they wished had stayed buried. Because history is never silent. It waits, behind the curtains, behind the locked doors of palaces, behind the pages of forgotten diaries, waiting for us to listen.